The day I stumbled upon the old photo album, I wasn't looking for trouble. I had been tidying up the attic, trying to make sense of the clutter that had accumulated over years of life together. It was supposed to be a mundane chore, the kind that leaves you feeling productive yet detached. But then, tucked away in a forgotten corner, I saw it. A thick leather-bound book covered in a thin layer of dust. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open, expecting pictures of family gatherings or faded mementos of his childhood. Instead, the first photograph stopped me cold. It was him, younger but unmistakably him. His arm was slung casually around the shoulders of a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful in a striking, effortless way. Her dark hair framed a smile that seemed both mischievous and intimate, like she knew a secret the camera couldn't capture. Beneath the photo, in his handwriting, were the words, "The beginning of everything." I stared at the caption, my heart beginning to race. Who was she? What did that mean? I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just an old friend, a girlfriend from before we met. But as I turned the pages, the uneasy feeling in my stomach grew. The album wasn't full of random snapshots. It was a record of a life I didn't know existed. There were dozens of pictures of the two of them together, at a beach, at a park, at some candlelit dinner. Each one had a caption. "Her favorite spot," read one. "We'll come back here one day," said another. But the one that hit me hardest was a simple black and white photo of her laughing, her head thrown back, joy radiating from her. The caption read, "My forever." By the time I closed the album, my hands were trembling. My mind was racing with questions. Why had he kept this hidden? Why had he never mentioned her? And most terrifying of all, did she still mean something to him? That night, as he came home, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every glance, every touch, felt tainted by the weight of what I'd discovered. I didn't say anything, though. Not yet. Instead, I began to watch him closely. At first, there was nothing unusual. His routine was as predictable as ever. But then I noticed the small things. A new cologne he hadn't worn before. Late-night messages on his phone that he dismissed with a quick swipe. The way his mood seemed lighter, almost buoyant, as if he were carrying some secret that made life sweeter. One evening, when he was in the shower, I couldn't resist any longer. I picked up his phone and scrolled through his messages. Most of them were ordinary work chats, group texts. But then I saw a thread with no name, just a single initial. L. The messages were brief but unmistakably intimate. "It was amazing to see you again," one read. "We'll figure it out this time," said another. My heart sank when I saw the latest one. "Can't wait until Friday." Friday. He had told me he was working late. I felt like the ground beneath me had been pulled away. My mind raced back to the album, to the woman with the dark hair and magnetic smile. Was Elle her? Had she come back into his life? And if so, what did that mean for us? I didn't confront him immediately. I needed more proof, more clarity. Over the next few days, I played the role of the unsuspecting wife, all the while gathering clues. I found myself obsessing over the album, flipping through its pages late at night, searching for answers in her face, in his words. The more I studied it, the more I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. On Friday, as he left for his so-called late meeting, I followed him. My heart pounded as I trailed his car through the city, trying to stay far enough behind that he wouldn't notice. Eventually, he pulled into the parking lot of a small, dimly lit restaurant. I watched from my car as he walked inside, and then I saw her. She was older now, of course, but still undeniably her. The same dark hair, the same effortless beauty. She smiled as she greeted him, and he hugged her in a way that shattered me. It wasn't just a casual embrace. It was filled with history, with meaning. I wanted to burst into the restaurant and demand answers, to scream and cry and make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I sat frozen, watching through the glass as they talked, their faces lit by the soft glow of candlelight. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. When he finally came home that night, I was waiting for him. I confronted him with everything, the album, the messages, the meeting. He didn't deny it. Instead, he sat down, his face heavy with guilt, and told me the truth. Her name was Leah. They had been together before we met, and according to him, she had been the love of his life. Circumstances had pulled them apart, and he had never truly gotten over her. Finding the album had been like opening a wound he thought had healed, and when she reached out to him recently, he hadn't been able to resist. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand how he could betray me like this. Another part of me felt a deep aching sadness, not just for myself, but for the years of our marriage that now felt like a lie. As I write this, I'm still trying to figure out what to do. Do I fight for a man who might always love someone else? Or do I let him go, knowing I'll never be his forever? The answers aren't clear, and the pain is raw. All I know is that the woman in the photographs isn't just a part of his past. She's very much a part of our present, and maybe even our future. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and pain. I felt like I was living in a fog, every moment weighed down by the revelation that my husband had been living with a piece of his heart in someone else's hands. Leah wasn't just a memory or a fleeting thought from his past. She was here, real, and suddenly terrifyingly present in my life. He tried to explain himself, but every word felt like a knife. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said one night as I sat stiffly on the edge of our bed, refusing to look at him. "When she contacted me, I thought I could handle it. I thought it would bring closure." He ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with regret. "I never meant for it to go this far." His words only deepened my anger. "This far?" I snapped, turning to face him. "Do you even hear yourself? You lied to me. You hid her from me. And now you're telling me it wasn't supposed to happen? What am I supposed to do with that?" He didn't have an answer. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the floor like a child caught in a lie. For the first time in our marriage, I realized I didn't know this man as well as I thought I did. The weight of that realization was suffocating. Over the next week, I became consumed with the need to understand. I wanted to know everything: how they met, what they meant to each other, and most importantly, why he couldn't let her go. Late at night, when he was asleep, I'd open the album again, poring over the photos as if they held the key to all my questions. I memorized her face, her expressions, even the way she tilted her head when she smiled. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was an obsession, a ghost haunting my every waking moment. One day, I found myself doing something I never thought I'd do. I searched for her online. It didn't take long to find her. Her social media profiles were polished and curated, each photo a snapshot of a seemingly perfect life. She worked in marketing, lived in a trendy part of the city, and had a dog named Milo that she doted on. Scrolling through her posts, I felt an odd mix of anger and envy. She seemed so confident, so at ease with herself, as if the world had never let her down. Then I saw it. A photo of her with my husband. It was recent, taken at the same restaurant where I had seen them that night. The caption read, "So grateful for second chances." My blood turned cold. She wasn't just someone from his past. She was staking a claim to his future. I confronted him again that evening, shoving my phone in his face. "Care to explain this?" I demanded. His eyes widened as he saw the photo, and I could tell he wasn't prepared for this. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, but his tone betrayed him. He sounded desperate, like a man scrambling for an excuse. "What is it then?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because it looks to me like you're rekindling some great love story while I sit at home like a fool." He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. Leah, she wanted to talk. She wanted to see if there was still something there. But I told her I'm married. I told her it's too late. "Is it?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because it doesn't feel like it." His silence was deafening. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, sharing secrets, building a life I wasn't a part of. I tried to imagine what he saw in her that he didn't see in me. Was it her beauty? Her confidence? Or was it simply that she came first, that no matter how much time passed, she'd always be the one who got away? The next morning I made a decision. I needed to see her. Not as the faceless rival in an old album, or the polished woman from social media, but as a real person. I needed to understand what I was up against. I found her office easily enough. It was a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed success. I waited outside, my nerves fraying with every passing minute. When she finally appeared, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked different in person, less polished, more human. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a simple blazer over jeans. She looked normal. I followed her to a nearby coffee shop, my heart pounding as I rehearsed what I'd say. When she sat down at a corner table, I approached her, my hands trembling. "Leah," I said, my voice unsteady. She looked up, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "Do I know you?" "I'm Emma," I said, sliding into the chair across from her before I lost my nerve. "Ethan's wife." Her expression froze. For a moment she didn't say anything, and I wondered if she was about to get up and leave. But then she sighed, setting her coffee down. "I was wondering when this would happen," she said quietly. Her calmness disarmed me. I had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even arrogance. But she seemed resigned. "I just want to know," I began, my voice breaking. "Why? Why now? Why after all these years?" She looked at me, her expression softening. "Because I never stopped loving him," she said simply. And I thought, maybe he felt the same way. Her honesty caught me off guard. I had braced myself for lies, for manipulation, but not this raw vulnerability. "And what about me?" I asked, my eyes filling with tears. "What about our marriage? Our life?" "I'm not trying to hurt you," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "But sometimes when you lose someone, you spend the rest of your life wondering if you made a mistake." I had to find out. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with a truth I wasn't ready to face. I didn't know what to say. Part of me hated her, but another part of me understood her in a way that scared me. I had fought so hard to build a life with Ethan, but deep down, I knew that a part of him would always belong to her. When I left the coffee shop, I felt hollow. Seeing her hadn't given me the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it had only deepened the wound. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't some cruel, calculating woman trying to steal my husband. She was just a person, flawed and desperate, clinging to a love she couldn't let go of. And now I had to decide whether I could live with that, or if I'd be better off walking away. The days that followed my meeting with Leah were some of the longest and most excruciating of my life. I couldn't escape her words, her face, the quiet resolve in her voice when she admitted that she never stopped loving Ethan. It felt like she had reached into the core of my marriage and exposed something fragile, something I hadn't even known was there. The certainty I had built my life on, that my husband was mine, that we were a team unbreakable, was gone. Ethan knew I had spoken to her. I didn't tell him outright, but he could sense it. The tension in the house was unbearable, thick with unsaid words and unaddressed emotions. He tried tentatively to reach out to me, but I wasn't ready to talk. What could I say? That I met his first love, and she seemed more honest and vulnerable than I'd expected? That she made me question everything I thought I knew about him, about us? Instead, I buried myself in mundane tasks, hoping the rhythm of daily life would numb the ache. But nothing worked. Every time I looked at him, I wondered if he was thinking of her. If the smell of my shampoo, the sound of my laugh, the warmth of my touch now felt like pale imitations of hers. One night, as we sat in the same room yet worlds apart, I broke the silence. "Did you know I spoke to her?" My voice was soft, almost shaking, but I couldn't keep it in anymore. He looked up from his book, startled, and then nodded slowly. "I figured," he said, his tone cautious. "She told me she never stopped loving you." I continued, my eyes fixed on the floor. "And you, what about you, Ethan? Do you still love her?" The question hung in the air like a live wire. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the way his mouth opened and closed as he struggled to find the right words. "Emma," he began, his voice heavy, "it's not that simple." "Why isn't it?" I shot back, my voice sharper now. "It's a yes or no question, Ethan. Do you still love her?" He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt my heart splintering into pieces. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "A part of me will always love her. But that doesn't mean I don't love you." The words were like a punch to the gut. I had prepared myself for many answers, but this agonizing middle ground was worse than anything I could have imagined. "A part of you?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "So what does that mean for us? Am I just what? The consolation prize?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, standing up and putting distance between us. "Emma, please," he said, his voice cracking. "You're my wife. You're my life. I chose you. But you didn't want to choose me, did you?" I shot back, my anger rising now. "If things had been different, if she hadn't left, you would have stayed with her, wouldn't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said it all. That night, I slept in the guest room. Or rather, I tried to. Sleep was impossible with my mind racing, replaying every moment of our marriage through this new lens. Had he been thinking of her on our wedding day? When we bought our first home? When we talked about starting a family? The memories that had once brought me joy now felt tainted, their meaning twisted into something painful. The next morning, Ethan knocked softly on the door. I didn't respond, but he came in anyway, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know what to say to make it better." "Maybe you can't," I said quietly, my back turned to him. "Maybe this is something we can't come back from." He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me otherwise. Instead, he just sat there silent, as the weight of our crumbling marriage pressed down on both of us. Over the next few days, I started avoiding him as much as I could. I left for work early, stayed out late, finding excuses to be anywhere but home. I needed space, time to think, to figure out what I wanted, what I deserved. But everywhere I went, I felt haunted by the ghost of Leah. She was in the back of my mind constantly, a shadow I couldn't shake. One afternoon, while I was at a cafe trying to distract myself with a book, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Can we talk? Leah." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to block her number and pretend she didn't exist. But another part of me, the part that craved answers, couldn't resist. "Where?" I typed back. She suggested a park near her apartment, a quiet, secluded spot where we could talk without interruption. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting on a bench with Milo, her dog, at her feet. She looked up as I approached, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down beside her. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I need to know why you're still here. Why you're still in our lives." She nodded, her gaze distant. "I understand. And I owe you the truth." For the next hour, she told me everything. How she and Ethan had met in college. How their love had been intense but tumultuous. How circumstances, distance, careers, misunderstandings had pulled them apart. She admitted that she had been the one to end things, convinced at the time that it was the right decision. "But I regretted it," she said, her voice soft. "I regretted it every day." "And now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from him?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't come back to ruin your marriage, Emma. I came back because I needed closure. I needed to see if what we had was still real." "And is it?" I demanded, my emotions boiling over. "Is it still real?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at Milo, stroking his fur as if searching for the right words. "I don't know," she said finally. "But I think that's something Ethan needs to figure out." Her words hit me like a blow. She wasn't just leaving it up to chance. She was leaving it up to him. To my husband. And suddenly I realized that the real question wasn't about Leah or even Ethan. It was about me. Could I keep living like this, caught in the middle of their unresolved story? Or was it time to write my own ending? When I left the park that day, my mind was a hurricane of emotions. Leah's honesty, her vulnerability, it wasn't what I expected, and in some twisted way it made everything worse. I had wanted her to be the villain, the cruel interloper trying to steal my husband away. But she wasn't that. She was a woman grasping at what she believed was a second chance, a chance she felt she had lost years ago. And now I was left to wonder, was she right? Did she deserve it more than I did? Ethan and I didn't talk that night or the night after. He knew I was unraveling, and maybe he was giving me space to come to terms with everything. But what he didn't understand was that space wasn't helping. Every quiet moment was filled with questions I couldn't answer. I replayed Leah's words over and over, each one cutting deeper. "I think that's something Ethan needs to figure out. But what about me? Did my feelings, my pain, my marriage mean so little that I had to just sit and wait for him to decide whether or not I was enough?" The thought infuriated me. I had spent years building a life with this man. I had loved him, supported him, trusted him. And now, because of her, all of it felt like it could crumble in an instant. The breaking point came one evening when Ethan came home late. He told me he was working, but I didn't believe him. I couldn't. Trust had become a foreign concept, something I no longer knew how to give. When he walked through the door, his tie loosened and his face tired, I was already waiting for him in the living room. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice sharp. He stopped, his hand frozen on the doorknob, and looked at me. "At the office," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, standing up. "Were you with her?" His expression hardened. "Emma, I told you. I'm not seeing Leah. I'm trying to fix this with you." "Fix this?" I laughed bitterly. "How, Ethan? By avoiding the problem? By pretending she doesn't exist when she clearly still does? How am I supposed to believe you when I don't even know if you've made a choice?" "I have made a choice," he shot back, his voice rising. "I'm here, aren't I? I'm with you. But is that because you want to be?" I demanded, tears streaming down my face now. "Or is it just because you feel obligated? Because it's the easier choice?" He didn't answer right away, and that pause, the same hesitation I'd seen before, shattered something inside me. "I don't know what you want me to say," he admitted, his voice soft now. "I'm trying, Emma. I'm trying to make this work, but you keep pushing me away." "Maybe I'm pushing you away because you don't even know where you want to be," I said, my voice breaking. "You're still in love with her, Ethan. You can't deny that." His silence was answer enough. That night I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where I was going or how long I'd be gone, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not like this. I needed space. Not the kind that suffocates you in the same house, but real space. Distance from the chaos that had taken over my life. I went to a hotel on the edge of town. A nondescript place where no one would recognize me. It felt surreal. Lying in that unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling as my marriage unraveled around me. The days turned into weeks. Ethan called and texted constantly at first, begging me to come home, promising we could figure it out together. But I couldn't face him. I needed time to decide what I wanted, what I deserved. For so long my life had been defined by him. Our relationship, our plans, our future. But now I had to ask myself if I could live with being second best, with always wondering if he was thinking about her when he looked at me. One afternoon, as I sat by the window of my hotel room, watching the rain streak down the glass, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart sank as I opened it, half expecting another message from Leah. But it wasn't her. It was Ethan. "I need to talk to you. Please. One last time." I stared at the screen, my emotions warring inside me. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence stretch on forever. But another part of me, the part that still loved him despite everything, couldn't let go. I agreed to meet him the next day at a small cafe near the hotel. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with his hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, he stood up quickly, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. I didn't respond, my arms crossed as I waited for him to speak. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he set his cup down. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice low. "About us. About everything." "And?" I prompted, my tone colder than I intended. "And I realized something," he said, meeting my eyes. "I've been selfish. I've been holding on to something I should have let go of a long time ago. Leah, she was my past. But you, Emma, you're my future. And I've been too blind to see that." His words were unexpected, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "How do I know you mean that?" I asked finally, my voice shaking. "How do I know this isn't just another promise you won't keep?" "Because I'm willing to prove it," he said, his tone steady now. "I'm cutting all ties with her. No more messages, no more meetings. She's not a part of our lives anymore. I'm choosing you, Emma. Completely." His sincerity was undeniable, but so was my lingering doubt. Could I trust him? Could I forgive him? Or was it too late? As I sat there, staring into the eyes of the man I had loved for so long, I realized that the answers weren't simple. Healing would take time, maybe more time than either of us could give. But one thing was clear. This was a choice I had to make for myself. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was ready to start. I sat across from Ethan, his words hanging heavy in the air between us. He looked at me with a mix of desperation and hope, his eyes pleading for forgiveness, for understanding. But I wasn't ready to offer either, not yet. My heart felt like it had been pulled in 1,000 different directions, each one more painful than the last. And now, here he was asking me to believe that he could simply let go of Leah and rebuild what we had. I don't know if it's that easy, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. You've already broken something, Ethan. Something I don't know if we can fix. His face fell, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. I know, he said softly. I know I've hurt you and I hate myself for it. But I don't want to lose you, Emma. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to reach across the table, take his hand and tell him that we could make it work. But something held me back. The memory of Leah's face, her quiet confidence, her undeniable connection to Ethan. It all lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. I need time, I said, my voice trembling. I can't make any decisions right now. I need to figure out what's best for me. He nodded again, his expression pained but understanding. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I had finally taken control of the situation, made it clear that I wouldn't be rushed into a decision. Sadness because deep down I knew that no matter what choice I made, someone would get hurt. Maybe even both of us. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on myself. I stayed in the hotel, taking long walks to clear my mind, journaling my thoughts, and talking to friends I had neglected during the chaos of my marriage. They listened without judgment, offering support and advice but never pushing me one way or the other. It was exactly what I needed: space to breathe, to think, to process everything that had happened. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and Ethan, he was always there, lingering in my thoughts. I missed him. I missed the sound of his laugh, the way he used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. I missed the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared. And yet, every time I thought about going back to him, I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. Then one day I received a message that changed everything. It was from Leah. She had sent me a long, heartfelt email, explaining her side of the story in more detail than she ever had before. She wrote about how much Ethan had meant to her, how losing him had shaped her life in ways she hadn't even realized until recently. But she also wrote about me, about how meeting me had made her see things differently. I don't want to be the reason your marriage falls apart, she wrote. I thought I was chasing closure, but maybe what I was really chasing was a version of the past that doesn't exist anymore. I see now that Ethan loves you, truly loves you, and I don't want to stand in the way of that. I'm leaving. For good this time. I hope you both find the happiness you deserve. As I read her words, I felt a strange sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Leah was stepping back, removing herself from the equation. But that didn't mean the decision was made for me. The damage had already been done, and now it was up to Ethan and me to figure out if we could repair it. That evening I called him. When he answered, his voice was hesitant, unsure. Emma, he said, his tone laced with hope and fear. I got a message from Leah, I said, my voice steady. She's leaving. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear him processing the weight of my words. What does that mean for us? He asked finally. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm willing to talk, to figure it out. If you're willing to do the work. I am, he said immediately. Whatever it takes, Emma. I'll do it. We agreed to meet the next day at the house. It felt strange walking through the front door, seeing all the familiar things that had once felt so comforting but now seemed alien. Ethan was waiting for me in the living room, and as I sat down across from him, I realized just how much had changed. We weren't the same people we had been before all of this started, and maybe that was a good thing. I need to be honest with you, I said, breaking the silence. This isn't going to be easy. I'm still hurt, Ethan. I still have doubts. But if we're going to try, I need to know that you're fully committed to us. That there's no part of you still holding on to her. There isn't, he said, his voice firm. I let her go, Emma. For good this time. You're the only one I want. The only one I've ever wanted. His words felt sincere, But I knew they weren't enough on their own. Actions would speak louder than anything he could say. And for the first time, I felt ready to give him the chance to prove himself. Over the next few months, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. We went to counseling individually and as a couple, unpacking the years of unspoken feelings and unresolved conflicts that had led us to this point. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to walk away, when the weight of it all felt too much to bear. But there were also moments of hope, small fragile moments that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him in the first place. Little by little, we started to find our way back to each other. It wasn't perfect and it never would be. But it was real. And for now that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of everything began to shift. It wasn't that the pain vanished, it was still there. A dull ache that lingered in the background of my mind. But it became more manageable, less consuming. Ethan and I settled into a rhythm, a cautious, deliberate process of rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't smooth. There were days when I couldn't look at him without remembering the album, the photos, the captions that still felt like tiny daggers in my chest. There were nights when the silence between us felt suffocating, and I would lie awake wondering if we were just delaying the inevitable. But then there were the other moments. The small, quiet gestures that showed me he was trying. Like the way he'd bring me coffee in the mornings just the way I liked it without me asking. Or the way he'd leave little notes for me to find, tucked into my bag on the bathroom mirror slipped under my pillow. They weren't grand gestures. They were simple words, heartfelt apologies, and reminders that he was here, that he was choosing us. "I'm sorry for the ways I've hurt you," one note read. "But I promise every day to be better." Therapy was hard. At first, it felt like opening old wounds, digging through the years of our relationship to uncover the moments we had ignored, the cracks that had started to form long before Leah reappeared. The therapist was gentle but firm, guiding us through uncomfortable truths. Ethan admitted that he had never fully dealt with the feelings he had for Leah, that he had buried them instead of confronting them, hoping they would simply fade over time. "I thought I could compartmentalize it," he said during one session, his voice raw. "I thought if I just focused on Emma and our life together it would go away. But it didn't. And that's my failure, not hers." Hearing him say that hurt. It felt like a confirmation of everything I had feared, that I had been competing with a ghost all along. But it also felt like a step forward, an acknowledgement of the truth we needed to face if we were ever going to move past it. I too had to confront my own feelings. The anger, the betrayal, the deep-seated fear that I wasn't enough. I had to admit how much I had tied my sense of worth to our marriage, how I had ignored my own needs and desires in the name of being the perfect wife. Therapy wasn't just about saving our relationship, it was about saving myself. As we worked through these things, something unexpected began to happen. I started to see Ethan not just as the man who had hurt me, but as the flawed, complicated person he was. Someone who had made mistakes, yes, but who was also really trying to make amends. And in seeing him more clearly, I started to see myself more clearly too. I realized how much I had lost in the years we had been together, how much of myself I had sacrificed to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to fit into the mold of what I thought a good wife should be. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, the silence between us felt different, softer, less tense. I turned to him, studying his face, the familiar lines and contours that had once brought me so much comfort. "Do you ever think we'll be okay again?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the answer I needed. It was honest, and honesty was something we had both been missing for far too long. Slowly, I began to let him in again. I let him hold me at night, even when it felt awkward, even when the memories of everything that had happened made me want to pull away. I let him kiss me, tentatively at first, as if we were learning each other all over again. I let him see the parts of me I had been hiding, the anger, the pain, the vulnerability that I had tried so hard to suppress. And in return he did the same. He opened up about his fears, his regrets, the guilt that had been eating away at him since the day I found the album. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said one night as we lay in bed, our fingers intertwined. "I was scared. Scared that if I admitted it, I'd lose you. But I lost you anyway, didn't I?" "You didn't lose me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not completely." I'm still here. And I was. For all the pain and doubt, for all the moments when I questioned whether we could ever truly heal, I was still there. Because for every scar our marriage bore, there were also memories of love, of laughter, of the life we had built together. And I wasn't ready to let go of that, not yet. As time went on, the memories of Leah began to fade. Not completely, but enough that they no longer felt like a weight pressing down on us. Ethan deleted the album, an act that felt both symbolic and necessary. I don't need it anymore, he said as he hovered over the delete button. The past is the past. I want to focus on the future, with you. It wasn't a perfect solution. No amount of deleted photos or heartfelt apologies could erase what had happened. But it was a step forward, and that was enough for now.